Good then. Good. So, guys, I'm Craig Shipman. You might know me from Third Floor Wars. You might know the podcast, Tabletop Talk. You might know our videos. And of course, we have back here Kyle Rowan and Matt Carter, both who have been on the show before. No more softball stuff where you guys get to talk about whatever you want. It's time for me to pick your brains. So, the first thing I need to know, you guys have been sitting on so much information for the past who knows how long. You guys have known all of this that you're going to reveal today. So Kyle, let's start with you. What was the thing that you were just super excited about putting out there and letting the world see?
Well, I mean, the starter boxes, but specifically the Bayou Bash starter box. So for me, Bayou Bash is really near and dear to my heart. I can't wait for the board game to come out, but the minis are also beautiful. So what we decided to do with Bayou Bash, and we'll have more information in the future, is to keep the game more accessible. We mixed the components up a little bit, so the players who want the minis are still going to be able to get them in a starter box, but players who want a fast and accessible game.
I think all of us got muted.
Are we muted? Hello? I am muted. Testing.
Nope, Craig's still muted.
Yeah.
Am I the only person not muted?
Yeah, we're getting muted a few times.
Okay, can you hear me now, guys?
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you now.
All right.
What was?
Gotta love them
Yeah.
technical hiccups.
What's funny
Live
is
show.
We have been so stressed out for the last couple of days about the video aspect of it. Who knew it was the audio that would be the twist of fate? So excuse me. So Kyle, the starter boxes, and specifically the Bayou one. I love the idea, guys, of having faction specific starter boxes, all versatile models. The fact that out of the box.
Oh, and now, new technical issue. Looks like we got Craig to drop on us.
Oh. I really enjoy this blank image of
We can
There he
play.
is. Well,
Oh, hi, Craig.
Matt and I will just do a Q&A between each other.
Okay. So what I was saying is that the concept, guys, of those starter boxes, being able to introduce people via the hardcore henchmen, having it all versatile, so even us vets will be picking these up and getting stuff out of it is huge. Matt, how about you? What have you been sitting on for all this time and not telling me when I had you a guest on the show that you were just dying to reveal today?
Yeah, so mine is somewhat secretive. It's we've been leaking a little bit of it here and there with Waldo's Weekly, but I was super excited for Ivan. He is one of my favorite characters in the Explorer Society. He's been around for a very long time, and he's near and dear to my heart. And honestly, I'm excited to put him on the table at my local game store, just so I can get crushed. Not that he's bad; I'm bad. I'm going to clear that up right now.
Well, between you and me, Matt, now you and I need to play each other so we can battle for who's the worst at Malifaux.
We'll do it.
All right. So I think probably the biggest thing revealed overall, and it's something that we kind of knew about, right, is the Explorer Society. So I'd be curious, Kyle, for you, this Explorers are going to be new to M3E. As a new faction, it's an 8th faction, but the Explorers are not new to the world of Malifaux. They've existed for a while, right?
Originally, they were called the Malifaux Exploration Society, and they've been in the Malifaux lore since 1st edition. You can go back, and I think it was maybe Rising Powers or Twisting Fates, but they're also in the Fated Almanac way back when. You can find more information about Lord Justin Cooper then and what he was doing if you really want to deep dive and get all that information. But the Explorer Society has been sprinkled out throughout our lore. As I mentioned in the previous stream, Tannenbaum in Defense of Innocence, and there's been loads of other stuff that we haven't announced, but you can probably find a few hints if you dig deep enough.
So, Matt, I would assume the first decision is we're going to create a new faction, right? So you guys commit to that in the design room. We're going to start a new faction. Was it just you knew it was going to be Explorer Society, or was there some debate about that?
There was debate. It was not exclusively Explorers all the time. In our design room, it was a lot of going back and forth about what we thought was going to be the best for the community, what characters we thought would be the best to add, and seeing really where we wanted to take the story overall. And there were a lot of different routes that we went through way back at the start of M3E in the planning phases of really like, are we going to add a faction? And then once we decided, yes, which one or how many or however we want to do that. So it is definitely a big decision point that really comes down to how we're approaching what masters are going to be what faction, dual faction masters, and for us it was a big process. So.
Yeah, I would imagine so. But definitely the first one is to say, even before we've decided any keywords or anything, it's just like, look, we're bringing Explorer Society. That's going to be that, and then you go from there, right?
It wasn't
kind
always.
of. There were some.
Society.
Yeah, it wasn't always. For example, when we got down to our last two choices, one of them was the MNSU as their own faction.
Oh, wow.
Because at the end of second edition, the MNSU and the Arcanists were not in a good place with each other. And it was a really big decision for us on how we wanted to either stitch up that relationship or we could have let it fall apart. And honestly, it came down to our community and how players would approach if a faction was entirely split down the middle. And we decided that wasn't the best decision for the game. And we would rather approach it with new characters and telling stories and expanding on other parts of Malifaux and really letting us tell a new narrative in different places so that the narrative of the MNSU and Arcanist is still ongoing, but it is not to the fully fracturing.
There was even another faction
Well,
that we were briefly contemplating.
Yeah.
I'll just call it was we called it the Old Soldiers. You can piece that together however you will. That's a story for another time. Who knows what happens in the future? But we've got a few older characters in our game. That's all I'll leave it.
Yeah, that's probably.
I'll say our faction deciding process was a very long thing that had a lot of iterations.
I'm sure. Well, I got to say, I mean, as interesting it is about, considering the MSNU as its own faction, my head probably would have exploded if that meant there was now two Arcanist factions. So for my own sake, I appreciate the decision to go.
But you got to think about the Arcanists that you like and the ones that you don't like. Because the ones that you like, they're MNSU. Because why not?
God. You hurt my soul. All right. Yeah. So I want to dig even deeper in, guys, on this process because it's really fascinating because now we're going to be seeing the end product, right? We're going to be seeing when we've already seen two of the keywords and hints at the two keywords, but there's more to come. And those that listen to my show know that I love going back in time and really learning those steps. But before we do that, I know that we've got some stuff to give away. So I was thinking maybe we should give away our first prize. So the first prize is going to be a $10 Weird store credit. The person that wins this just needs to shoot an email to weird-games.net. That's just the regular support address. I am going to read off the question, and the first person to type the correct answer into the chat is going to win it. Weird Kelly will announce the winner. She's just going to be watching like a hawk to see who it is. So for our first prize, which is a $10 certificate at the Weird store, here's the question. What is Somer Teeth Jones's keyword? Man, that's an easy one.
That isn't. Just throwing like low balls.
That's easy. Right? That's easy. All right. So Kyle, now that we've gotten an idea from which faction is going to be the eighth faction, let's go a little bit backwards then. So now you guys have all committed, all the arguments are finished. We've decided on explorers. What's the next step? Do you go directly to a keyword? Do you start laying out what the keywords are?
For me, I'm a very much a theme first designer. So for me, I started digging into the old lore, looking up established characters, made sure we stuck with, who they were, where they were, or what they could be today, started brainstorming those sorts of ideas. Malifaux is very much a story-driven game, so we wanted to stay true to that. And more broadly speaking, we wanted to answer some questions that some people might have while, creating new ones, because what's the point of closing a door if you can't open another one? There's always a few things that we've wanted to talk about as far as the world of Malifaux, for example, and we briefly touched on it with the gibbering hordes, but where is that ocean where they came from? You'll be getting a little bit more information about that with the upcoming book, and questions like that. Once we established the types of stuff that we wanted to answer, we had the groundwork set. Wild ideas started popping up, but eventually we started figuring out characters and keywords and where we wanted to explore new ideas, where we wanted to dive deeper into established stuff. So I hope we hit those notes.
So that's interesting to me. So Matt, what comes first, the keyword or the master, or does it depend?
For our process, especially for the Explorer Society, generally the masters came first.
Okay.
When we were working on them, it basically starts with how do we approach this keyword? So we might come up with different ideas for different masters and kind of pitch them out until we have a few to kind of get started, and then as we're branching out the 8 masters that we wanted in the keyword, then we'll start to go further into any individual keyword so that we can really figure out what they want to do. But having a general sense of we want Cooper and his big gun, and we already have Bass and the Cowboys and McCabe and them, and then Ivan, we knew we wanted Shadows, but we didn't have a full extent of what his card might look like or what the crew is there. Once we have that full set of like 8 masters and a basic idea, then we'll start to dig much deeper into them and find their specific mechanics. And that it really lets us make sure that the faction as a whole kind of has pieces of everything, so they're not all of a sudden they're like, oh, we have no master that can do any amount of damage.
Right.
So it really lets us balance out everything starting a little bit beforehand. So
Kyle, when you look at so we've now at the point where we said, okay, we've got our 8 masters, we've got an idea of kind of where in the faction each of those masters fit. At what point do you then step outside of the new faction and look at how the new faction, the 8th faction, is going to fit against the other 7?
That's kind of a big question. I mean, from a mechanical sense, that's obviously a balance question, right?
Right.
We want to look at new mechanics while establishing the existing ones. We want to make sure that nothing is broken. We want to make sure, from a story perspective, we did want to make sure that the Explorer Society were introduced in a very different way. A different way. Like the last time we introduced a new faction was the 10 Thunders, and they were infiltrating other factions, and we wanted to do something very different. Luckily, the Exploration Society was already a part of our lore, and there are already relationships built with other factions, so we were able to take that into a very different direction. For example, the Explorer Society are working with the Guild. There's already lore about that. There's already little hints that you can find. A few chronicle stories if you want to dig into that. So, I'm sorry. I went on a tangent.
Yeah, no, that answers my question, Kyle. So you've already made it clear that you're really a narrative-driven designer, right? So
right.
Even before you get to the mechanics, you want to figure out where it fits in the world narratively and things like that. Here's what I'd be curious about, because it's obvious how you dug into the lore and pulled this faction out of it, right? So as you're then designing the faction, I'd be interested to know if there's a feedback loop where suddenly as these individual keywords start forming, do they start impacting the lore?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's one in particular that I'm thinking about that we're not talking about today. Well, actually, no, the more and more I think about things, the more it's like, okay, we haven't talked about that character, we haven't talked about that character.
Hey, audience, I'm trying to get him to screw up. I really am.
But yeah, it's, the feedback loop is a matter of, we wanted to, once we establish a little bit more about the characters, we want to do a deep dive of the mechanics. In addition to that, at the same time, we're also looking at big picture stuff. So it's not really so much a process of we're doing one thing at a time. It's kind of this cyclic approach. And Masters, for example, that Matt was talking about, while we had 8 Masters established at a certain point, some got cycled into henchmen, some got cycled into enforcers, and some
got cycled out entirely.
Right, yeah. Many of those, which maybe they come back. We don't know, but yeah.
Well, I think the best move for you guys would be to go ahead and release a 9th Master and just dead man hand it right out of the gate.
Oh yeah, people will love that. Yeah.
That'd be a great move.
So, guys, I want to get a little bit deeper into some of the goals that you guys kind of set for yourself, and I want to talk about how those goals maybe changed over time and which goals you really think you pulled off. But before that, let's do another quick raffle. So this is going to be for another $10 Weird Store credit, and the same rules as before. The first person in chat that gives us the right answer, Kelly's going to call you out, and you guys just shoot an email, and we'll arrange for this. So, what token does Hamlin's keyword mechanic revolve around? So there's a token that's unique to Hamlin. What is that token that everybody hates when they play Hamlin?
Excuse me. As a Hamlin player myself, I feel slightly offended.
I'm really shocked, Matt, that you're a Hamlin player. That really shocked me.
I did not start playing Hamlin until 3rd edition. I want everyone to know
that. So, Matt, let's talk about, and you and I on our episodes that we've talked about, you set goals, right, as a designer. Yeah. So can you remember some of the initial goals that you guys set for this faction?
Yeah. So a lot of it was taking certain like familiar concepts and like twisting them just a little bit, so that we can take, say, like a guy with a gun. How do you make that really interesting, and really delve deep into that story, and having Cooper have kind of the worst moral compass you could have as a person, and telling that story. Like Cooper is really, really interesting for us, and you kind of brought up how in the last question, like how the stories revolve around the characters. Cooper being established before in the lore, we had to kind of bridge the gap of where he was compared to where he is, and that tells a lot of the story for the Explorer Society and the world as a whole. It's really not the same Explorer Society it was back then, and just Cooper's story helps tell a lot of that, and that was a lot of what was there. But as far as like goals for the faction, one of our favorite kind of things to talk about is the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yeah.
Of just this group of spectacular people that are all very different, but together they can form this amazing thing. And we don't hide some of the inspiration that the game comes from, at least on our part. And to us, kind of taking like this really small piece and twisting it in a cool way will be what we're looking for. But also the main goal for me is to make a fun game for people. If you play and have fun and get what we want out of that character, if you're playing Cooper and feel like you're a hunter, that is really gonna make me feel like I did a good job.
So I'd be curious, Kyle, for you, up to a certain point, this has all been incubated inside of the Atlanta office, right?
Hopefully.
It's insular. Okay. But when you open it up to playtesting is the first time that, people outside of Weird start to look at it. Was there any initial reactions that you got out when playtesting started that surprised you?
Well, not so much. Well, I mean, yeah, there were surprises, but the one thing that immediately comes to mind are the Runaways for Cooper, the totems. There was some internal debate about which direction we wanted to go in the office. We tried something; it was a wild idea. And if no one is familiar with the Runaways, Cooper has 3 totems, and he is essentially trying to hunt them down. At one point, early in the playtesting, we had the Runaways played by the opponent. It was
Oh, wow.
a wild idea that we wanted to try, and while it worked in a casual atmosphere, it we had to think about tournament players. If you don't know your opponent across the table, how comfortable are you with having a player touch models, let alone move them around? And I mean that's particularly important in today's climate with touching objects and that sort of stuff and keeping
Yeah.
everyone safe. So while it wasn't necessarily surprising, it was that we were more 60-40 in when we put it out in playtesting. The the sway, I guess I could say, in the feedback that we got was heavier in one direction than we thought. But ultimately, thanks to our playtesters, I think we got a really sound direction with those characters. So
Yeah, I will say some of our wildest ideas should never be put in Malifaux, and our playtesters really helped to just be like, maybe don't do this. It's silly and interesting, but please don't. And so, like, it's very helpful to have that sounding board of just be like, we're crazy, right? Like, we wanted to see what people thought. Clearly, you guys are going to tell us what you think in a very brutal manner.
yeah,
That's
Malosaurus
funny.
Rex was at an 80 mil at one point. But it just didn't work, in Malifaux. It's
Yep.
just not the right scale. We learned some lessons with Euripides' crew and terrain
80
and
mil
all that
Mallet.
sort of stuff. So
The
Yeah.
80 millimeter Malifaux Rex works really well if you have no terrain on the board,
Right.
and that's
Right,
about
right.
it.
Yep. Yeah. Mechanically, things gets impacted by that. And I want to talk a little bit more about mechanics and kind of that process because we've really been focusing so far on high level stuff, overall thoughts, overall feel, and the narrative aspect of it. So I want to dig into that, but we've got more goodies. So let's do another $10 store credit. Of course, you put this as one of the questions. Okay, great. Here you go. First one to answer this in chat wins a $10 credit at the Weird Store. What is Karis's first name? First one to answer correctly in the chat, you'll be identified.
You do have to spell it correctly. That's a slight hint.
Oh, you have to spell it correctly?
Maybe not. I don't know.
All right. So Kyle, let's talk a little bit more about mechanics.
Sure.
So let's do it with Cooper. So you guys, at a big sense, you say, okay, we know how Cooper's going to feel. He's hunting things down. You got the runaway concept. He's going to have a big gun. What I'd be interested in is as you start to drill down and get into the mechanics, how do you make it unique? Literally, what is that process? Because not only do we want Cooper to be unique within the faction, but it'd be nice if he was unique within the whole game.
Right.
Mechanically.
So with specifically Cooper, we knew right off the bat, give him a giant gun. But we didn't want to make him feel like Von Schill, for example, who is a big gun but also supporting his crew, or Dashel, or other, many other characters in our games with a gun. So we already knew that the character was somewhat focused, maybe a little bit of tunnel vision going on with the character. So we really highlighted that, and you can see that a little bit more with his adversary effects on his runaways and that sort of thing. So he can't get distracted, for example.
Nice.
So and then beyond that, in that keyword, we already have snipers in our game. But how do we reinvent the sniper with a twist, not so much a 180? So we have the Crypsis Corps, for example. These two fine gentlemen who are war vets who end up getting into underneath Cooper's wing, we'll say. You'll find out how that happens in the book, of course. But how do we look at a sniper in a very different way? And one thing that we did with them is we looked, actually, strangely enough, at a video game, XCOM. There's an Overwatch mechanic, if you're not familiar, and Patient Strike was loosely inspired by that. So
Interesting.
So if you're not familiar with Patient Strike, if you weren't part of the beta, essentially they look at a point in the map, and if someone crosses those sight lines, they get a free action. Essentially, like the simplest terms. But
excuse me. So that's interesting to me. What I want to know now, though, Matt, is I would imagine there's a huge desire as a designer to create a brand new mechanic that doesn't exist anywhere else, right? Something that is completely unique. How do you balance that without making making the game overly complicated? And I'd be interested, maybe if there's an example of that with Cooper, how you kind of strike that balance where you have it mechanically unique, but you don't end up with blowing up the game with all of these new mechanics and rules.
Yeah, a lot of finding a unique action or ability is finding a way to do it within the certain rule set that we already have. So we just talked about Patient Strike. Patient Strike is a very simplistic idea when you conceptualize it. Pick a point, you shoot anything that comes between the two of you. And we really like that as a unique style. It is something no one else does. And we kind of had to think to ourselves, how do we write this in the Malifaux language? It's something we've talked about internally. Malifaux is not written in English. It is written in this language that's almost English, right, but it's not. And the idea of here's a marker, and so you place that and you draw sight lines to that marker. That is something that is pretty common in the game and not too convoluted to understand. And so if we can take that baseline mechanic and transform it in just a little way, we can do some interesting stuff with it. And then even Ivan, for example, has a unique way of summoning simply because of how it shows up on his card. There's no other master in the game that's summoning with an attack action trigger. And that by itself will make Ivan feel a lot more aggressive in how he's attacking people. But it comes down a lot to balance. Because of that, he's only summoning one model a turn.
Right.
He's also limited and restricted to the willpower of his target. For him, in order to get his most powerful summon, he has to have a stat tied with his opponent. He has to attack someone with willpower 6 or higher, which will limit him in a way so that he can attack multiple times, but how much effort can you put in before your summon isn't as worth it? You're losing master AP and all that. Yep. And so it's a lot of it will come down to small balance changes and just tweaking a small mechanic that currently exists in the game to a new way.
So Kyle, I would imagine between you and Matt, you guys, have different roles, right? You guys, even though you have worked together for a while, you're designing the same game. You each are bringing a unique perspective to it. And I would imagine one of the two of you would be the butcher in this process. Who cuts more and trims the fat more, you or Matt?
Whew, that's a good question.
Don't lie on this answer, Kyle.
What's that? You want to answer it? Is that what you said?
I said, do not lie.
I'm actually not sure. What would you say?
I think Kyle cuts more content. I come up with a lot of crazy ideas.
Okay.
So let's assume that that's true, then, Kyle. You're known as the butcher now.
All right,
okay?
that's fair.
So if you're going to cut something, if you're going to trim the fat, whether it be from simplicity or you just think it's a dumb idea because Matt came up with it, what do you?
That's never happened.
What is is there an overall philosophy that you have when you finally kill one of your babies and just say, you know what, this has to go?
Well, in regards to that, don't be afraid of killing your babies. You will almost always end up coming up with a stronger idea afterwards. I can't think of a specific instance, and I'm sure Matt's thinking of 100 right now. But one thing that I do try to look out for is this a similar mechanic that's already happening, and does this flavor feel necessary to really highlight the character? And if not, can we take a look at that other mechanic? Because one of the design goals with third edition was a series of streamlining. We did want to make sure that people understood what certain abilities and actions meant just by reading what the name of that action or ability was. Explore Society does tip a little bit in the scale of originality, and I think that that's good and refreshing, but a lot of the mechanics still kind of boil down to what people are familiar with when it comes down to the core. Like another character I can't reveal right now, but we have a heal centric master in the game, in the Explorer Society, and everyone knows how healing works, for example. But what she does on the table is unlike anything we've ever seen, and that was so.
She?
Oh, yep, spoilers. But because of that feel being so integral to the character, I didn't feel that it was the right move to step in and butcher it,
Right.
that sort of thing. And that one happens to be my favorite master, so maybe I was a little biased there.
I have to be a little nice to Kyle. Generally, when he butchers something, it's just cutting off just the top of something. It's not a full cut butchery. It's just like a haircut. So generally we try to, if something is really not working, we will try to figure out what we're wanting to do with this mechanic and what are people currently liking about it. What do we like? And really find where can we go with those things that isn't where we're currently at, because clearly that's not working. And sometimes it's as simple as changing a number. Even Molly with Malifaux 3rd edition, the Left's Caress, like that ability, changing one word, like the irreducible part of it, made it way different of an ability and had a much better feel to it. And that's an example from a long time ago, but it's pretty easy to take things and reshape them to be as best as possible. But also there's sometimes where you're like, this is not working. Can we start from scratch? Can we take 10 minutes, put it aside, write something else, and then really iterate on that to the point that eventually and hopefully we'll come to love it as much as we did the last baby, and we won't have to kill this one.
There were a fair amount of stories that were popping up that I can't get into, but you're talking about essentially haircuts. I'm like, okay, that character, I do remember that time.
It's very fascinating, and I hope that the listeners feel the same way. It's very fascinating when you're the end consumer to learn how the sausage is made, because everybody who plays mini games thinks they can design them, but there's only 2 people on this broadcast right now that have actually done it. So that's fascinating to me. So guys, I want to dig in a little bit deeper both on Apex, and I want to talk a little bit more about DUA, but let's give away our last $10 store credit with another trivia question. Quick note, you can only win one of these prizes from this broadcast. So any of you that have won the first 4, you guys are now not eligible. This is the last $10 credit. We've got more prizes coming after this. So here's the question. The first one to answer it, you'll be identified in the chat by Weird Kelly. In the game, what is the size number of Groot slang? First one to answer wins another $10 credit. So gentlemen, let's talk a little bit more about Apex. Now, you guys already knew Cooper existed in the lore. He was already a thing. You've already talked about how, part of the development was the gap between the last time he was mentioned and now he's a model. He's a keyword in and of itself. Was there, and it sounds like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen may have been somewhat of an influence on the overall faction. Was there a inspiration for Lord Cooper himself as he started to take form? How about you, Matt? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so for us, we had an idea of who Lord Cooper was from how he's described as he's a big game hunter that likes going out, and he founded the Explorer Society. And we looked at that and we were like, okay, we have this kind of basic character. How do we really approach him in a new and interesting way? And one of the things we kind of realized mechanically is that we have no pure construct masters in the game. And so we had to think to ourselves, like, okay, we want to do this for the Explorer Society, and it doesn't particularly fit for anyone. But we have this character that is kind of stereotypical. He's kind of normal, and we wanted to approach him in a different way. Hey, he's different, Kyle. Don't give me that look. But one of the first things we wanted to touch on him is if we took kind of what is happening to Von Schill, he's lost a couple limbs in combat, and took it to the extreme. If someone is truly an apex hunter and a predator, how far will they go on their own kind of body, and what will inspire that to happen for them? And so that kind of took us to like Cooper where he is now, in that he is way more machine than man. He is absolutely to the brim. One of the reasons he doesn't have the living keyword is if you were to kill Lord Cooper, there would not be enough Ghibli bits to leave a body. Wow. You could not raise anything out of that. He is that mechanical in how much that he has changed.
So Kyle, as Lord Cooper started to form, right, as he started to firm up, both as a thematic narrative master and as well as the mechanics of him, you've decided this is what's going to make him not Von Schill. This is what's going to make him not any of the other masters or keywords in the system. Talk to me about that trickle down effect now. Do you go to henchmen at that point and start kind of firming those up a little bit? Do you go right to the totem? How do we start to fill out the keyword?
Well, we started by watching Jumanji a lot. I'm kidding. Yeah, no, but
okay.
the bad guy in Jumanji, he hunts people. Anyway, I actually can't remember which character came first after Cooper.
Oh,
I think it was. But early on, the Vitagi Huntsman, we knew that we wanted to have those characters alongside them. We knew we wanted him to hunt characters. So I guess the Runaways came relatively immediately after that.
I knew exactly which character is the first one that came after Cooper.
Okay.
It's the Malifaux Rex.
Well,
that's absolutely what I wanted immediately.
That might even be before Cooper.
So the game is the first one. What he was hunting?
Well,
that was one of those. We absolutely wanted this T-Rex in the game, and we were very excited for it. And kind of getting. Sometimes we really like this character. Where can we fit it? How can we make it work?
Yeah.
And this is one of those characters that I know that as a fan of the models, like it's gonna make a great model, and people are gonna really enjoy that, and it gives us the opportunity to really create that. So
Kyle, let's talk a little bit about the Malisaurus, Kyle. At what point does Malisaurus become also a Fae?
Well, actually, it's the other way around. Malisaurus Rex has always been a Fae. Through the Breach adventure with the Malisaurus Rex, Jurassic Foe, you can find a little bit more about that beast, and you find out where it is. It's in the Wildlands, and without going into too much story detail, Cooper is a hunter. Maybe he can't necessarily take this one down, but I mean, what he can't take down just makes him stronger if he can have it as a pet.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the direction how we got him to fit. But the Malisaurus Rex. Spoilers if anyone didn't know already. You could play the Malisaurus Rex in Titania's crew.
So now is the big challenge, I would think, Kyle. You say, okay, it's one thing for me to design a single keyword model and make that model worth taking as an Apex model, and balancing that model point-wise, ability-wise, making sure that there's a 50-stone crew somewhere that would include this model, but not every 50-stone crew might include this model. I would imagine then going, well, we got to kind of do it with Faye too, so that maybe Titania would take Mouse. Like, what does that process look like, other than like being a pain?
Well, the one thing immediately that comes to mind is, she's already putting out a ton of markers and that sort of stuff and terrain out there. We wanted to make sure that a giant Malisaurus is going to be able to walk around the board. So that was one major component of it, but it does kind of already fill a gap for Titania. I guess her characters are a little bit more defensive, but I mean, a giant dinosaur isn't going to hurt things.
I know, mechanically speaking, when we're making dual keyword models, we try to look at both keywords and see what can we do that is interesting and brings a new dynamic to each of them. And going over the Fey keyword, they have a lot of the abundant growth trigger, which is on a crow, and it I think places someone and does some extra damage. I don't have it in front of me. But for the Malifaux Rex, we wanted to approach how can he interact with this abundant or with this trigger and the Cooper abilities and so forth. And so one of the things we ended up with was one of his 2 bonus actions, Wild Hunt, which allows him to anyone that is engaged with him. If a friendly model would attack that model, they automatically get a crow to their action. So Titania's crew, bringing the Malifaux Rex, is going to utilize this trigger way more often rather than relying on soul stones in their hand. They can just rely on a big dinosaur being there. Now, as it's a big dinosaur, it's going to get in the way, and so you're still going to have to deal with friendly fire, and Cooper is really good at dealing with that, where Titania's crew has some more other ways around it where they might not be dealing with friendly fire or those cases. And so this plus crow to their actions really brings an interesting dynamic of I can spend 10 soul stones now to bring a big dinosaur and also save me some soul stones later.
Yeah. As you get down to the minion level, and let's talk like overall, Matt. Like in your mind, from a design perspective, and this doesn't apply just to Apex, what's the sweet spot for a minion? What role do you think a minion should fill in a keyword?
So there's a couple different roles that a minion can fill. The base ones are just the base, like, kind of roles of the game, so it can play like a tank, a basic schemer, and a basic attacker, but it shouldn't be doing too much in those places. And if it does that, it needs to have some sort of semblance that it'll be in check and in balance. And so even the new minions, in Cooper's keyword, he has a couple, the Vitagi Huntsman, their kind of role is acting as this support damage dealer, that they can put out these pit traps and utilize some of their abilities, like Band of Blood, which will let them get extra attacks in by damaging people over time. But as a minion, they need to be performing something specific so that if I go into a game and I'm like, okay, I need to be able to choke off this one single point, I can bring this minion and he might do that. Even old models, the one I think of is very, very good. The Necropunk. The Necropunk is designed to be incredibly fast, and being able to get in and out of places, and that's what you want to take it. If we were to make the Necropunk also a super crazy damage dealer, it would be really odd. And for the Explore Society, it was really finding what we want to do. And even the Crypsis Corps we want to have a sniper, because as hunters, we thought that was a really interesting mechanic, but we also wanted to approach it in a different way. And so having them have a little bit different roles with their Patient Strike, and they have a new ability in the game called Beneath the Leaves, which allows them to essentially absorb the terrain around them as they hide in whatever it is. So if a pit trap is next to them, they're treating the entire area around them as that pit trap. And that gives them some unique defenses, but also some flavor, as they're literally so camouflaged that you can't see them. And as a minion, their job is to be a sniper. And that Beneath the Leaves ability is to save them from being charged immediately out of the gate. And so everything should kind of resolve around this single ideal. And as you go up in cost and complexity, Enforcer, Henchman, and so ever, bringing in new ways that the character can interact with the game is really the goal. Some characters, as they get to like really high end, they might be, here's a 10 stone. I do damage, but I also do more damage and then more damage after that. And that can be a very, very interesting character, provided that it is still doing something completely unique in that role. It's not just, I have 30 attacks that do min 3 damage each. So hopefully everything kind of fills these different roles, and you get to a place that not everything will be taken. But even in a keyword, we're not trying to make every model a 10% chance of being taken. A henchman in a keyword, we want them to see that henchman when that keyword shows up quite a bit. So Model 9, who's Cooper's henchman, it is part of Cooper's crew, and he is intended to kind of be there most of the time.
Yep.
Because he supports Cooper's crew in this really interesting way and does something very unique for them. But some other models, like versatile models and out of keywords, those are the models that we don't inherently want to see every game. But in a keyword, you kind of want to be able to say, I can see bringing one model of each type in every situation, and hopefully as a group, they'll bring everything I need to do to win the game that I'm playing. But as schemes and strategies go, like sometimes you'll have a master who's just not going to do the strategy as well as, say, someone else. And that's kind of the joy of Malifaux, is being able to say, like, I can switch once I know my objectives and really do as best as possible that I can. So hopefully that answered that question. I know I went on a tangent. So.
It did. We're now late for dinner, but no, that was good.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
How about you, Kyle? A little bit briefer than Matt, though. Because you've seen them shuffle up and down, right? You've seen minions become enforcers, enforcers become henchmen, masters get downgraded. Do you have kind of a barrier that once that model crosses that barrier, it drops or goes up? Is there an overarching philosophy in your mind as that happens?
So I mean, there's that factor of the the minion, enforcer, henchman, master levels, but you also have to factor in cost when it comes to a character.
Yeah.
There are minions that cost 8. There are minions that cost 3, even below that, and you have to consider all of that. Generally speaking, at least from a story perspective, the named characters end up becoming enforcers and henchmen, while their buddies or group ends up becoming a little bit more broader than that. But it depends. And that's like with a named character, we know that we can do more specialized stuff there, right? We can give them. We have a story to connect to. We can give them this special rule or that sort of thing. Whereas we know, like the Vitagi Huntsman, for example, we know that we want to see at least 1 to 3 on the table. So let's make sure that we can do that without breaking the game at the same time.
So Kyle, we've been keeping an eye on the YouTube chat as we've been doing this, and actually a pretty good buddy of mine who's also an excellent painter, Sebastian. He had an interesting question, and Kyle, I'd like you to take a crack at it. It is pretty straightforward, and what Sebastian wanted to know is, will there only be new models in these starter boxes? We've already established that they're all going to be versatile, but is the plan for these starter boxes to all be new models, or do you anticipate there being models that have existed before that'll get packaged in these starter boxes?
So currently the plan is new models.
Cool.
We don't have any intention on looping in existing characters into those. It is an opportunity for us to expand existing factions. So yeah, I hope that pretty much answers it.
Okay. Yep. So I want to, well, actually, you know what? Let's do another quick trivia question here. So this is going to be to get you a copy of the drive-through version of Obsidian Gate for Through the Breach. And again, the first person to answer it correctly in chat is going to win. This is an easy one. Even I could answer this one. What is the name of the walled off and restricted area of Malifaux City? We need the full name, 2 words. This will get you a free copy of Obsidian Gate on drive-thru.
While we wait, I saw another question that I thought we could answer real quick. Is the Rollins Nightmare Box? I wanted to touch on that very quickly. We'll be releasing the Rollins box later this year. We know that we needed to fill a gap with that box. There will be a new model in the Explorer Society that will be covering that base. We aren't mentioning what that model is yet. I want to, but yeah. So it'll have the M3E stat cards and everything. It'll be the same Nightmare Box. So look forward to that.
Yeah, that makes me happy because I've got that painted up. What were you gonna say, Matt?
That'll be around for Black Friday.
Black Friday sale. Beautiful. Matt, I want to talk a little bit more about DUA. And I want to talk about English Ivan. it sounds like maybe Cooper was first, or one of the first. Was English Ivan a pretty close second as far as starting to manifest in the design process?
English Ivan is one of those that people have been asking for a very, very long time. So he's always been in the back of our minds thinking, how can we do this? Do we want to do this character? He was somewhat early on. I believe when we were talking about the Explorer Society as a whole, and we could say he could come in here and have this very interesting story. He was one of the first to kind of pop into our mind and say, yes, we want to do this character. People have been excited to see where this story goes, and it lets us talk about other characters in the story that are not Explorer Society related, just expanding on who this person singularly is. And bringing back old favorites is really exciting for us. And I know Gibson and Ava will be making their way into Malifaux 3rd Edition as well. And you can find them in the initial story talking about Ivan as part of the DUA. And we really like those characters, and we're excited to see them.
So Kyle, I'd be interested then, as you start, if for somebody listening right now and watching right now, and I'm one of them, I don't know who English Ivan is. Literally, the first time I found out about him was when you guys sent me the cards a little while back. So, Kyle, can you give us an idea without spoiling anything? Like who is English Ivan?
That is a question that I don't think anyone in Malifaux could technically answer. He's sort of an enigma wrapped around an enigma, but we've saw him in first edition. We are introduced to Gibson and Ava. We are introduced to the DUA at that point, and we find out that he is working with the guild in that story. He's working with Lucius, and there's a heist. I believe that's the story where he tries to break in and gets a bunch of riot breakers. And we find that one of his Department of Ungentlemanly Affairs in that story ends up working against him. And, it turns out Ivan isn't privy to that. Later, much later, we actually, if you remember the Burning Man reveal with Kitchener and all of that, we see Ivan again and his interactions with it and his protections from it and all of that stuff. So we... kind of riffing off of what Matt was saying with including him into the Explorer Society, I think Ivan has more or less been a part of the conversation of wanting to include him into a faction for a long time. But the thing about Ivan is that he is always working for his best personal interests while, dipping his toes into every faction. So we know he has a relationship with Ramos. We know he has a relationship with Lucius. And we know he has a relationship with Mei Feng. But we haven't really gone deep into any of those directions just yet. And in the Explorer Society, you're going to find out a little bit more information about why he decided to join this one instead of really going full Arcanist or Ten Thunders or something along those lines.
So Matt, go ahead.
I was going to say it was really important for us with English Ivan that even if you Craig don't know who he is, right, that in the Explorer Society book you're not super confused. He does start with a somewhat not clean slate, but at a slate that is reasonable for someone to get on board. He has his own story that he is telling that we're going to expand upon, and that it's going to be really easy to just jump in and kind of know who English Ivan is all about, so that it doesn't hurt people who aren't as caught up on the lore. So
that's cool. Now here's the other question, and again, this is me being way behind on the lore, Matt. He's dual keyword, right? So he's DUA and he's Umbra.
Yes.
So can you explain that to me from a narrative standpoint, and then we can drill down from there?
Yeah, I can kind of explain that I can't explain. So
Matt, nobody's
DUA,
listening. Just say it. Yeah. It's just the three of us.
The DUA has been around for a long time, and Ivan's really been a part of that. But the Umbra keyword part of him and what happened and who Mr. Mordrake is really the story that is leading Ivan forward today. It's why he is with the people that he is now. And why we're seeing him in 3rd edition currently. But for that, I really want to point you to when the book comes out.
Okay.
You'll be excited to read
I will
more
say,
about it.
I'll give a little
That's fair
tease.
enough.
There is an existing third edition story that you might have read. You won't think it's the faction that he is connected to, but there's a little bit of information that you can find in one of the previous stories that will give a little hint with what happened to Ivan and what's changed him.
We drop hints for
Yeah,
everyone, man.
Yeah.
I like that the guy that was going to say, look, guys, we have to be real careful about what we talk about and stuff like that. He's the one squeaking for me. It makes me feel good. So I want to build on that a little bit more, Kyle. And again, I'm repeating this theme, but I think it's significant. Give me an elevator pitch. What makes English Ivan and his keyword unique?
Well, starting from theme alone, light and shadow. That's his big thing. I mean, we already do have Hungering Darkness, so we see a glimpse of that. But to be clear, they aren't connected, and Hungering Darkness is doing very brilliant space stuff. Here we're talking literal light and shadow. DeWalt with his anti-luminal bridge, his mechanical firefly. We wanted to have Ivan feel like he is literally peeling shadows off of characters when he's summoning. So that feeling is right there in the mechanics. Shadows aren't just, you can't have shadows if you have nothing but darkness. So you have to create that light in order to make the shadows. And, how does that look like on the table? And it turns out our engineer mechanic character in DeWalt ended up becoming a perfect opportunity for that. Beyond that, though, we started looking at other, existing world lore as far as, what do people think about when they think shadows? And there's one in the, I believe it's Germanic lore. I could be wrong. Someone, I'm sure, in chat is going to correct me. But the Brocken Spectres, they are loosely based off of these giant shapes that look like people with rainbow effects happening around them. And if you saw the art, you'll see the neck brace around him that was loosely inspired by the rainbow you would see around the character.
Wow.
So you get a lot of that sort of stuff if not on the mechanics of the card or not in the bios in the book, but also in the art on the character. So.
That's neat, and it paints an incredible picture of how unique he's going to be. Not only does it sound like within the faction itself, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head that's anything like that thematically throughout all of these. And considering the fact we have so many masters now, I think that's pretty neat. But I want to build off the mechanical part a little bit. So Kyle just painted a beautiful picture for us, Matt.
Yeah.
Of exactly how he looks and feels. Can you give me at least some examples? Mechanically, how that shows up, either on Ivan himself or in the keyword?
Yeah, so Ivan, I talked about it a little bit in our kickoff. His intercision trigger is completely unique in how it works. The idea of literally peeling or cutting off someone's shadow and having it show up right next to them, only to immediately take one of their actions and punch them in the face with it. He is taking your shadow. It's going to look back at you and say, I like that weapon. I'm going to steal it. And then hit you with it. But all these characters, we really wanted them to feel like shadows. So the Deva, who we've shown off images for, we haven't really talked about their card. They have one of my favorite abilities. I think it's called Clingy, which lets them, anytime you would move and you're touching a Deva, you have to take a move duel. Otherwise, it's just going to follow you along. And then also, Devas, they're made to kill. And whenever they follow along or place, they're going to immediately attack that person. So it really lets Ivan play this disruptive role and keep people down with his shadows. And each of the different Umbra models, there's 3 that he can summon, have different entire roles. So the Deva are more keeping you in place and really digging on damage. The Brocken Spectres are about being tanky and scary and really pushing in when they need to. And then the small little guys, the Nocturnes, they're for your really low willpower people. They're more about speed and manipulating the battlefield and pushing around the shadows that they need to. So for Ivan, it's really about manipulating the people that he has to kind of have this fun style to him that we think makes him play really differently, and he has a very slippery nature to him, getting in and out of where he needs to with his like shade step action, which is somewhat like leap, but Ivan is restricted to only traveling through the darkness. He can only teleport to other concealing terrain, but he has all of his Umbra models which generate it for him. They are living embodiments of shadow, and so like how that interacts makes for a really interesting playstyle for a summoner. So
that's really neat, and it's something I've always liked about Malifaux, guys, is that merging, and it merges the mechanics and the theme feel merge so well at all levels of the game. And my favorite place where it merges is just what you name the abilities, and then how the name feels like that ability. And it sounds like for this DOA and for English Ivan's keywords, it's going to be a whole lot of that. Guys, I've got another question from the chat I want to throw out there. And this is actually from somebody who I know, Donald, who, as you guys follow me on the socials, you're going to see soon I'm painting the new Colette box. And I want you to know that it's Donald's fault. So you can
Good
see
you, Donald.
Good choice.
Yeah,
Make Craig touch as many Arcanists as possible.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be beautiful. The sculpts on that thing I couldn't resist when Donald offered to have me paint it. But anywho, Donald asked a very good question, and it fits into what we're talking about here. And Kyle, I'd like to hear your thoughts first, which is, the process of deciding at the master level when you go dual faction. Is there a formula where you'd ideally like every faction to have X number of dual faction masters? Do you start off and a master is dual faction right from the gate, or sometimes they become dual faction? I mean, I'd be really interested to know how that occurs.
Well, third edition was kind of a unique example of that. We did want to make sure that each faction had 8 masters and that there were dual factions within each faction. Did I word that correctly?
Yep, you got it.
How many times could I get faction into a sentence? And I mean, we knew early on when developing third edition that McCabe and Bass, for example, we were going to have them dual faction. McCabe was already dual faction in the past. We wanted to explore that avenue from a story perspective. We saw him get kicked out by a certain red-coated faction, and that story is going to be fine. And then Bass, it was a brand new character that we players might not know a lot about, and we're going to see a little bit more of why he gets looped in. So in those examples, it started from story first, but that's not always the case, and I'm sure Matt can think of an example of when mechanics might come into play when it comes to dual faction stuff.
For mechanical reasons, sometimes it's just to explore different aesthetics that you wouldn't see by itself. So an example that doesn't exist currently, if you were to take like Resurrectionist and Bayou and make a dual faction master, you're going to see someone that would not exist in either of those factions alone.
Jot that down.
And it really creates an interesting dynamic of how do these characters coexist, and what can we put here that would make these characters work. And we get really creative ideas out of saying, yep, this person has got to raise the dead and also be a gremlin. What does that look like? Or not inherently be a gremlin, but from that perspective, it really lets us explore cool things. But it's also just a sort of balance thing between the factions, making sure that we have the ability to say, like, if you really like Arcanists, you can now pick up like Hoffman, and you might find that you really like him, and then you can kind of explore Guild, and it gets people to explore different places and expand their horizons while also still kind of feeling at home in their own native faction. So it's a little bit cheeky on our parts to get you to see more stuff, but it's also to really explore what's going on. So.
Well, I'm glad you put that last bit in there, because as loving and nice as you made it sound, we know exactly what dual faction is. It's bait and it's hooks, and it drags us into the next faction, which drags us into the next faction. I'm sitting here the Yeah, I'm sitting here the whole time as we're talking about, English Ivan, and we're going to see Mr. Cooper in action tomorrow on the third floor. Like Craig, you don't need another faction. Keep calm down. But I got to tell you, it's very, very exciting. Let's do another drawing real quick. We've got still 5 more things to give away, and things are just getting better and better. So I want to talk giveaway. I'm sorry. Another drive-through product. It's going to be the Days Without Accident through drive-through. So again, if you've already won something, don't bother answering. For those of you that haven't won anything, let's go ahead and get you something. The first one to answer correct, you'll be identified by Weird Kelly. And this is going to be another, what's their real name? So there's a model called Lost Love. What is Lost Love's name? The first one to answer it in chat is going to win. All right. So now I want to go, and we've talked about 2 of the keywords. We focused on English Ivan, and we focused on Lord Cooper. I want to move to versatile, and I want to start off with the one that we revealed already. So, Kyle, can you talk to me about the effigy and kind of where that effigy came from, from a narrative level?
Well, actually, I think correct me if I'm wrong, Rack, but I think we actually started with the emissary first, and then downscaled it into what the effigy might look like. We knew that we wanted to have an adventurous, curious sort of feel to the effigy, but and maybe it was at the same time. I mean,
it was kind of
both,
it might have been from what I remember. We started with the emissary, said we like this idea, scaled it down, did something else with that idea, scaled that back up, and they kind of went back and forth. I love the Intrepid effigy. He's one of my favorite new pieces. It's just it just artistically says explore all over him, and it makes my little heart sink. So I'm very excited for anyone. Also the fact that he's standing on a pile of gold with a chest.
And he's carrying the icon of the Explorer Society with the torch. But the emissary, as far as story goes, we looked at what other emblems, what sort of iconic stuff could we touch upon with the Explorer Society, and we knew that they had a manor, and that they're as wealthy as they are adventurous, and we started looking at what is around those manors, and so we started noticing all the lion statues and that sort of stuff, and that's kind of where that kind of came into play, and how they are treated as defenders of their homes and that sort of thing. So that sort of kind of immediately translated there, and then how do you downscale that? Well, you give the effigy some lion fur on his back, and
and so mechanically, how does that translate, Matt? So now that we've got to feel like what we want the effigy and everything to feel like, can you pinpoint some mechanics you think that people are going to find that really captures that?
So the biggest mechanic is also the very simple one for the emissary. He is defense 7, and that is one of those things that we put to playtesters, and some of them were not excited about that. Defense 7 is not non-existent in Malifaux, but it is very specific, and we wanted to make sure if we're going to build a tank for a faction, how to make sure that feels good. And a defense 6 model feels good defending itself, but it really can't protect you from all sides, where a defense 7 model can say, if I don't want something to hit and I have the resources, I can make sure it won't hit. And that's truly what a guard should feel like. And when we're hitting a 10 stone model, it lets you be powerful. Granted, he does lose other aspects, so he's not min 3 like the other emissaries. He's not incredibly quick. Right. His aura, while powerful, is more passive and defensive. It's not going to let you do crazy things. He is about defending his core and making sure passively that everyone makes it through the day. Mm-hmm. And mechanically, like, take the hit was kind of the obvious way to how do you make a bodyguard, because the bodyguard ability does exist, but it doesn't really represent as much as take the hit does. They both do different aspects. And he doesn't, I don't believe he has bodyguard simply because we didn't want to make him so overly complicated.
Yeah.
He doesn't entirely need it, and that comes down from like if we have a model and we can remove something and it doesn't feel terrible, we might just do that just to clean up space and make things a little bit easier. But also the aspect of how do you make this the emissary really interesting, giving him abilities to slow down people and push them out of combat, and then kind of chuck a spear at them on their way out. That was and initially, how do we make this model like fun and interesting to play? Because a passive wall is not super exciting,
Right.
but it can be for some people. It really lets you go all out with others and have more fun with, say, Ivan, because you don't have to be as careful. But the idea of I'm going to yell at you, put slow on you, and then chuck a spear your way felt very like Spartan to me, and that was kind of an inspiration on our end of that idea of like a phalanx.
Yeah.
Him giving shielded out to people and that kind of thing.
So Kyle, you're the butcher. Can you remember some fat you trimmed off of these two models?
Off the emissary, yes, absolutely. I can think of a very specific instance, and no, I can't tell you about it because the combination is about a master that we have not revealed. So,
well, what I think is
you can think of exactly what I'm thinking about.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Well, something that when I interview designers on the podcast, and and I've talked to you guys a few times, what I always love is this concept of saying, okay, we thought it belonged here, it doesn't belong here, right? So you trim it off and you say it's not going to here, but it sounds like in a lot of instances, what you guys will do is put it to the side. And maybe it'll come back, right? Maybe it'll show up somewhere else, or maybe you move it somewhere else. I mean, did you find yourself doing that, Kyle, and as you were designing the Explorers?
I mean, that's more or less what I personally try to do with everything I touch when it comes to design. I'm a firm believer that, and I'm sure the Matts in the office are tired of me saying it, bad ideas can turn into good ideas. So when you do kill those darlings, put them in a folder. Think about them later. Think about them in a different light. But don't just completely scrap the idea, because you don't know what's going to come up next. You don't know where you're going to be in a year mentally when you're designing a game, and you might want to revisit that old crazy idea and see how that fits. So no, that happens all the time here.
That's cool. That's cool. All right, guys, we're going to give away our last drive-through prize. I've got 3 more prizes after this that we'll be giving out here in the next 40 minutes. But the last one is the drive-through of Jurassic Foe. So if you like the Malifaux, this is a great Through the Breach. And a quick plug for 2 things as far as Through the Breach. I want to talk about what's happening on Saturday. The Dead Aussie Gamer is going to be doing a lot of doing a full actual play of Through the Breach. He was on the show last Tuesday. If you haven't listened to that episode, I can tell you that between hearing Matthew at the kickoff, between hearing Dead Aussie Gamer on the show, and what you see on Saturday, I think it'll be very difficult to stop yourself from wanting to play Through the Breach. So this is a great adventure for one of you guys and gals to pick up. So it's Jurassic Folk. Here's the question that could potentially win you a free copy of this. You'll be identified by Kelly Weird if you're the first one to answer it correctly. Who was the first one to teach Karai about how to control her magic? This is for you fluff nerds out there. Who was the first person or thing to teach Karai about how to control her magic? First right answer in the chat is going to win Jurassic Foe.
We went from big hat to that.
I know. That's what's
I think the toughest question was like the third, the Karis question. Because a lot of people just wouldn't know that. It's you would have to search to find it, but I don't know if it's in her bio now. So
that's funny. So let's expand out now that we've talked about the effigy. Let's talk about more versatile in general. And I want to start with you, Matt. I think in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I would imagine designing the versatile models for a faction has got to be one of the biggest challenges there are for the overall thing, because you want them. Well, actually, I'm not going to tell you what you want. What's the goal, right? So what's the goal for your versatile models in any faction?
Yeah. So it's I will say it is different. Designing Explorer Society from the start to design the rest of the factions at the start of N3, they had a different approach, for one. But for Explorer Society starting at the very beginning, versatile models for us let us do a couple things. The first one is aesthetically, they can not they're not tied to a specific keyword, so they don't have to have this specific aesthetic going on, and instead they can embrace just who the Explorer Society are as a whole. We can point at the Explorer Society starter box, be like, this is what these people are about. You see those guys in plinth hats? Like, that's what the Explorer Society normal dude is about. That's if you find someone walking on the street and they're thinking of Explorer Society, that's kind of the style of people that we're talking about. Aesthetically, it lets us approach that with a little bit more free reign because we're not tied to certain things. Mechanically, any versatile model should fill a very specific role that is not universal. So it should do something that you'll find occasionally, and you'll find that you'll want to see it, but it's not going to show up consistently all the time. So I can kind of think of two examples, both of which we've kind of talked about, shown off. But the one at the very beginning of the stream, the Bellhop Porter, which is the most adorable robot you will ever see. And I'm so very excited to get my hands on that model because I love him so much. He is doing something for the faction that, as a whole, the entire Explorer Society deals with markers. Whether it's scrap, terrain, etc. scheme. They all kind of deal with this in an interesting way. The Bellhop Porter does something that no other model does, but by existing in your game, he'll impact each keyword in a different way, just with these markers, and only he does it. And it's not inherently necessary to what you're doing. It will help out occasionally, but it's not all the time needed. I know that's very not specific because I don't want to spoil who the Bellhop Porter is, but he's doing something that is different and new. We've shown off also the botanist art. I'll do a slight spoiler here. The botanists like eating things, and if you can feed them, they will do this very interesting mechanic and grow bigger over time as we do the obvious Little Shop of Horrors reference.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to hide that one. But the botanist, like, if you want your markers around and you don't care about them leaving the field, you probably don't want to take the botanist because you have to constantly shove food in its mouth for it to really be powerful. And it lets you explore a different thing. But if you're already getting rid of those markers and you don't mind having a floor plant for the first turn, it'll make for a really interesting dynamic, but it's also not inherently necessary all the time. It's not going to be there if you're not dealing with like scheme markery, scheme shenanigans, because it's not as useful in those instances. So hopefully that answers that question.
It does. And Kyle, I've got some more questions related to Versatile, but we've got 3 more prizes to give out here. And I think the one I'm going to do next is what I'm going to ask a question about this. And Kyle, talk to me about the Miss model that we got here for the Gen Con sale. Where did she come from?
Well, Misguided was originally art for in the Through the Breach book. So just like last year's Miss model, Miss Feasance, we had that in Through the Breach. We love the art, and sometimes we try to think about outside the box. How can we use what we already have? How can we highlight a character in a different way? She already has this amazing Gatling gun. What other character does? Fuhatsu. They both look like they are screaming at the top of their lungs. It was kind of an immediate connection there. And we knew that 1988 was going to be a thing, so we were thinking in the direction of 10 Thunders from the start. So
that's cool. All right, so let's give out that model for free to the person who can answer this question right, who has not already won a prize. The first person to give us the correct answer will be identified by Weird Kelly. This is, I think, on the medium scale, guys. I think I'd be able to answer this one. Which master created the effigies? Which master created the effigies? Let's go ahead and first one to answer that correctly, you'll be identified by Weird Kelly. So Kyle, when we go back to the versatile models for a second, Matt gave us kind of an idea of, within the faction, kind of the roles you want to fill, both narratively, aesthetically, and mechanically, and kind of where they went. Was there any consideration when you're designing, because these are being designed from scratch now, was there any consideration about how they'll compare maybe to other factions and the roles and concepts that we see in the versatile models in Resurrectionists or Arcanists? Or do you really just limit yourself and really just focus on their role and how they fit in the faction that they're going to be in?
Well, I mean, in some regards, even more broadly speaking than versatile models, when you're designing a character in Malifaux, you can't help but have to think about the 500 other characters in the game.
Yeah.
So, luckily with versatile models, changing from the mercenary rule, for example, from 2nd edition, we're able to kind of put the blinders on, so to speak, and really hone in on the faction itself. And it did become, we had broad stroke ideas of like what sort of characters we wanted to have as we were developing masters, but we were also intentionally creating these gaps in weaknesses and stuff like that in those characters so that we could not necessarily fill them with versatile, but allow them some more utility in strange spaces. So for me personally, no, I think we were able to put the blinders on a little bit more and focus in on versatile in the Explorer Society. Matt might have a different opinion, though.
I kind of agree to an extent. For me, the versatile models, balance is super important, and we always have to consider that. And so always comparing it to what we have in other places. But it is really important to say, like, the Bellhop Porter is not balanced according to, say, like, the Arcanists have a versatile model that does this. The Bellhop Portal should do this, and every faction needs a versatile model that does that. That's not the case. We do have the Effigy Emissary, which are kind of that way slightly, but even they do vastly different roles for their faction. But it is important to know that, like, when we approach it, it's not like, oh, this faction is going to have really good versatile models. It's more of this, what we're trying to do is fill these really interesting and specific points. And so the versatile models hopefully don't show up all the time. And that they have this very clear role that when they do show up, they feel fun and interesting. But also it does help. So 10 Thunders with McCabe, it is somewhat important for 10 Thunders to have versatile models that do things, because McCabe started out and he didn't have a lot of models in his keyword, because we knew we were going to the Explorer Society. And for 10 Thunders, it wasn't making sure that they have crazy good versatile models or anything like that. They do end up having versatile models simply because of the models we chose. Like Samurai, we're not going to make Samurai like really low cost. Instead, they are going to be high cost models because of how they look and how they approach it and really what their backstory is. But we did want to say, like, yeah, we do have damage dealers in that versatile section for 10 Thunders. So McCabe can fight if people want to play as him. But that overall hopefully explains that point.
Yeah, it does. It definitely does. And what I want to do next, guys, is I want to take a little bit bigger step back, because not only are we, talking about a new faction, but we really now have gotten several months of 3rd edition. So I want to take a little bit of a step back. Before we do that, Matt, I got to ask you a question. So the whole time we've been talking, I've been very distracted. There's something behind you that's like sticking out of the top of your head. I can't tell what it is. It looks like, is it a voodoo doll?
This guy up here?
Yeah.
Oh boy, here he goes knocking things down.
It's our voodoo doll.
All right. So
for our office.
So, okay. So let's do this. I'm going to put a question out to the chat. The first one who answers this correctly can get this voodoo doll. I'm going to mute you both if you try to argue against this. All right, so let me find a good one here. Oh, I like this one. All right, the first person who answers this correctly can get that voodoo doll. Which Malifaux master leads the elite division? And I need first and last names. Which Malifaux master is the head of the elite
What about
division?
middle name?
And you didn't even think about that. Nice.
Full name.
So Matt,
Full name, guys.
set that aside. Now I don't have it sticking out of the back of your head while I'm talking to you, so that makes me feel better. All right, Kyle. You guys went through an incredible process in the transition from 2 to 3. And you know, I've had you guys on the show and we've talked through this a lot. You had a stable of models that you had to lift, reinvent, and drop down again. And that's a very specific process that has got its own flexibility and its own limitations. In a lot of ways, though, what you guys have been doing for Explorer Society is very different because you get to start from scratch. The same limitations didn't exist. So I'd like to know what you think were some of the big differences for you between reinventing all of these different factions and keywords from going from 2 to 3 to what you and Matt did with this new faction.
Well, I mean, so when we are dealing with an established character, we can't just reinvent their wheel, right? Karis is always going to be setting things on fire. We can't all of a sudden give her, I don't know, a fire hose or something along those lines. So we always knew that she was going to play a certain way. Now, with the Explorer Society, you know, those training wheels are more or less off for us. We can look at a character or a keyword and think about, okay, here are these established systems and characters. What else can we do? You know, and in some instances that was extremely challenging. In some it was very straightforward. Basically the training wheels went off.
Yeah.
We were able to dive in directions that we weren't necessarily able to with established lore and characters.
So I'd be curious for you, Matt, would you consider this process that you and Kyle have gone through, would you consider it more liberating or more challenging?
The terrible answer, liberating some, challenging in others. It's very nice to be able to flex your design muscles and just be like, I'm going to do this weird thing and we'll see if it happens. But it is also challenging because we don't have as much of a back foot to say, like, this has been designed 2.5 times at this point.
Yeah.
And we can't look back and say, like, okay, like, if people really liked this idea, so we'll bring it back here. It is all kind of different and new. But for me, it's really exciting to just say, like, okay, I have this cool idea. It never could have worked before. Now I get the chance to say, like, all right, we're doing it. We're going to have someone rip your shadow off of you and smack you with it. And designing new models kind of lets you do that. So it is very exciting to be able to start from scratch. But yeah.
In some regards, it is kind of scary, though, right? Because I think that some of the best designs do come from being extremely restricted. You get to go in certain directions. You know where the bumpers are, you know, and that sort of thing. And with the Explorer Society, a lot of that, those bumpers were gone. So
yeah, I'd be curious to know, Kyle, as you went through the process, were there times where you were looking either at a keyword or maybe a specific master, or even a specific model within a keyword, where you stopped and you said, you know what, this is too much like so and so in Resurrectionists, or this is now feeling too much like so and so in 10 Thunders. Did you find yourself going, you know what, we kind of need to relook this because it doesn't feel new, it doesn't feel unique?
Luckily, I don't actually think that there was a problem. I mean, so in like Ivan, for example, we knew that there was going to be some comparisons to summoning, but the way he's doing it is so drastically different. And with the Explorer Society as a whole, we started with the wild ideas, so we were able to go from there. No, I can't think of a single master that is like an immediately you can make easy comparisons to another master or keyword.
Were you hyper aware of that, Matt?
To me, it was like it was never the master as a whole. There are some very specific mechanics that, like, yeah, Ivan has Shade Step. It does teleport him, and making sure that feels unique to him. It feels somewhat like a leap, but it's also different. And there are pieces like that throughout the faction that you'll see, like, okay, this is an ability I've seen before on another master, but with everything else going on, it feels so different in context. Like, while this one thing is similar, everything else kind of changes the perspective on what's happening there. And so if I have an ability that interacts with ski markers in, say, Colette's crew, and then I put that same ability in Explorer Society, and that crew does entirely different things with ski markers, it's going to feel very different. And so as long as that line wasn't crossed and that they're doing the same thing in the same way and it has the same impact, like, it really needs to hit all three before we're like, okay, this is really bad. And luckily, when we start with the crazy ideas, it really becomes easy to be like, yeah, this is totally different than anything else we have.
I can think of one in particular that one of your favorites, Matt, that is just so wildly different, and I can't wait to show that character off.
Oh, you a jerk!
I'm so excited to show that character off.
You'll just have to get the Explorer Society book.
Not going to reveal any genders today.
I guess not.
You already know there's a she.
I'm trying. I'm definitely trying. All right, guys. I talked about kind of how unique this time is. And Kyle, I want to start with you. M3E is a year old now. It's been around. It's gotten played. Probably not as many reps as we wish because of thanks to COVID, but I'd like to know, as you, Kyle, specifically watched the release of third edition, then gets played for, play tested, gets played by several months by the greater public. People are super shy about their opinions on AWP, so some people just let you know what they thought. And then you get to the first errata, where you guys then get to touch it all again and make decisions that make some adjustments from where you went. And, you go through that process to now with the release. And specifically what I'd like to know for you, Kyle, is did any of this last year impact the design of Explorers? So were there learnings that you guys picked up after post-release M3E? Is there anything you can think of that you guys learned that really impacted in some way the design of Explorers themselves?
Well, I mean, I'm specifically this year, I kind of explained the Runaways, for example, in the playtesting and touching other models and that sort of stuff. That's a very specific instance.
Right.
But for erratas and that sort of thing, one model in particular that kind of comes to mind, and just so we're clear, when we designed or redesigned or fixed certain models, we were actually working on the Explorer Society at the same time.
Right.
The Bayou Smuggler. That was one model in particular that was a little bit undertouched, underused, and we wanted to give a certain flair to it. So we started tinkering. As we were tinkering around with the Explorer Society and abilities and actions and that sort of stuff, we started navigating around ways to make those models more interesting and that sort of thing. So you did see some slight adjustments and improvements on those characters based on ideas that we were going to be originally using for the society. So.
Oh, that's cool. How about you, Matt? Let's go back in time. Let's go back to unreleased M3E, Matt the designer, to Matt the designer now. What do you know now that you didn't know a year ago? What did you learn in the process of watching M3E get played for a year?
It's a huge transition for me. Like, going through M3E, like, I personally learned so much just through that process. And then when it's released, like, I still look back and see every single issue that hasn't been resolved in my mind.
Yeah.
And some people might pick out the big things, but I mean, occasionally I'll pick out like, oh, this phrase should be worded this other way. And so it's small stuff like that I'll make sure to try to carry through. Minor spoiler, I guess I'll give it to Craig. There are some abilities that came really early on with certain models that we were worded in a way that like works, and they did what they were supposed to, but it's not an inherent best way to do it. And so having seen that and having it interacted with for so long, and then saying like, okay, we can do this same thing but fix this one issue.
Right.
And so like there is an ability in the game that's very similar to Alan Reed's. I think it's called Talk for Alan Reed. He makes you discard cards or reveal schemes. And there's an ability like that in Explorer Society, but it's written in a different way, primarily because of what we learned from seeing that ability and seeing how that trigger interacted with certain rules. And so just being able to look back and say, okay, while we absolutely want to push for unity and having the same thing written every way, in the same way every time, sometimes you look back and be like, this showed up one time and it's not amazing. We could make it better. And so trying to make sure that it works in the best possible way. But even then, it still is a little bit different.
Yeah.
And so learning small things like that and just slight tweaks is stuff that you pick up along the way. I remember the first Malifaux model that I ever made, and I would never, ever print that model in a million years. It was bad. But even some of those ideas, after going through the process, you're like, okay, I know how I could actually implement that now in a better way. And like Thune is actually a weird example of a model that is brand new, but had some of the mechanics that I thought of like super, super early on, and rewriting them to be like actual Malifaux mechanics and not just terrible gobbledygook. And so like it's a lot of just refinement over time in how you change as a designer, for me personally, but also like how we approach new models changes. Especially the Explorers, we can be a little bit crazier because we have a whole catalog that we can look back and kind of reference and say, this is crazy. Is it so crazy that it doesn't make sense?
Does it break the game? No? Okay.
Yeah, that's basically it.
How about you, Kyle? What's different about Kyle the designer today versus Kyle the designer before M3E came out? What do you think this last year has taught you?
Oh, wow. I mean, there are specific instances I can think of. There are broad instances.
Well, let's think broad, Kyle. Like, when you look at yourself now, I mean, as a designer, you're always growing, right? The designer you are today is not the designer you were 3 years ago. I'd be curious to know what seeing M3E out in the wild, how that has changed either your design philosophy, maybe your design approach. Is there something you think has really happened in the last year that's different about what you did a year ago?
I mean, even prior to that, you know, when I first started designing games, I wasn't even designing tabletop stuff. I was doing digital stuff. And then moving into tabletop, it was a whole new world, you know. When you're dealing in a digital game, for example, it doesn't really matter how you word things in a tutorial, but the wording in a tabletop game is, you know, absolute. You have to be perfect on that. And I guess in Explorer Society was a great learning tool for that. Finding ways that people are interpreting certain mechanics that maybe we hadn't considered or that sort of thing. So word choice, we'll just stick with word choice.
It's something that you spend a lot more time thinking about and paying attention to now.
Absolutely, yeah.
We talked about, you know, as part of that progress, you had the release of M3E. We had the errata that came out, mid-year. Out of curiosity, I don't know if we can talk about it or not, but do we have another update coming in anytime soon?
So we don't have anything to announce, but I will say that FAQs and erratas, as far as releases go, is a fairly delicate thing. And not just like as far as releases go, but I mean, we know that the community here that's watching are probably some of the most hardcore fans, and but there's a wide spectrum of players that play our games. And not everyone gets as actively involved in erratas and FAQs and that sort of stuff. So, in FAQ, for example, like we have to make sure that we're answering the right questions, the right times.
Yeah.
We don't want to overwhelm our players at the same time. Same with erratas. We are dealing with an analog game. We don't want to change every like Matt was saying. He notices certain things in the game right now that he might want to change, but is not necessarily crucial to the experience of the game, that sort of thing. So it is an important thing for us to consider when to release those and how to release them. That kind of accommodates all of our players.
Yeah, I agree. And I got to tell you, I appreciate the fact that you have not taken the temptation that certain companies, which I won't name, have done, which is a very constant churn of balancing and of updates and erratas. Because it's one of those things that I think from a veteran, hardcore competitive player standpoint, they're like, that's fantastic. You've got new data. Let's change it this week. Let's change it next week. There's a company specifically, and I'm thinking about that, has done this. I would argue, I think it's hurt the game, because you get to the point where you just can't keep up, especially if you're not a hardcore competitive player. If you're a casual player, which the vast majority of miniature game people are. So it makes me happy, Kyle, that you guys are sensitive to that. Because all the pressure that I would imagine you guys get is to, hey, you need to fix this model. Hey, I never bring this model. Fix that. And so that's the only pressure. You have nobody else out there going, hey, guys, relax. It's okay. We're having fun. So to be able to do that internally, I think is good. I'm kind of trying to keep conscious of time, and I've got my elephant in the room question here to kind of finish this up. But before I ask that, let's give out our big prize. So the big prize is our 1988 box. So it's going to be that alt box. And I need to throw a bone to my Through the Breach players out there. So this is going to be a Through the Breach question. And again, the first one to answer this correctly is going to win that Nightmare Box, and you will be identified by Weird Kelly. I've got like 3 of them in front of me. I'm kind of trying to decide. Let's do this one. What is the term for an undead fated character in Through the Breach? So there's a very specific term for an undead fated character in Through the Breach. The first one that can give us that answer is going to win that Nightmare Box. All right, so Kyle, the elephant in the room. We're releasing a new faction, right? And
no elephants in Explorer Society.
Yeah, right. It's a hunting faction, so the elephant's dead.
Spoiler, man. No elephants is a spoiler.
There's two concern. Everybody's excited. Everybody is super excited that we have a new faction. We've got 8 new masters coming. We've got, a whole new thing coming. But there's 2 things that every player at some level is concerned about, and that is bloat. And we've kind of talked about bloat indirectly, over the last 2 hours when we've talked about how you make things unique but not too unique, and how you kind of make things feel familiar but different, and so on and so forth. But so I'm not going to talk too much about the bloat. I do want to talk about power creep, and I want to talk about how that factors in, and how much influence for you, Kyle, to start. Like, how much is that? Well, first of all, do you think power creep is a thing?
Oh, I mean, yeah, absolutely. It can be a thing, and it's something that can very easily. As you're designing a model, it's something that you can easily overlook. I do think that gut reactions to those sorts of things end up becoming bigger than the actual problem might be, usually.
Right.
It is always something to keep an eye on. It is an easy thing to fall into mentally, but I do think that, generally speaking, the first time you look at a keyword or a master and you get stomped, I do think that sometimes the reaction is this master is broken. There's a problem here.
Yep.
When really you have to figure out how to beat that master. Malifaux is very much a game about bringing the right characters for the right job, and we want to stay true to that. But we also want powerful characters. So where's the give and take in that process? There should always be a weakness in some instances. It's just a matter of finding that weakness.
Yeah. And I talk about this on the podcast all the time, that there's multiple levels. And this is something that I think is very unique to Malifaux. It's part of why I love Malifaux so much, is you have your first reaction, which is you just look at the cards, right? So you just look at the cards, you look at it, and especially for something as brand new as a new faction, you look at it and you go, oh my goodness, this is unbelievable. It's incredible, right? And that's the theory foe that I talk about all the time, which I think you can do. You can read the rules for other games and I think get a strong sense of what they're going to do. What's so unique about Malifaux is that I don't think you can. I think, you're only getting maybe 10% of the story when you just read the cards. So then there's that next level, and Kyle, you talked about this, is that the first time you put it on the table, either as the player, and maybe you got stomped, right? Because you didn't know what the heck you were doing because you're not familiar with it, or you're on the other side of the table and you've never faced this before and you get stomped. And then there's that, oh my God, this is broken and so on and so forth. You talked about that, but it's funny how once you get the reps in, either as the player or as the opponent, that changes things. And I find that uniquely Malifaux, and a big reason why I think it's the best mini game out there. Matt, for you, talking about power creep, it's not something that's talked about just in Malifaux. Every single mini game, there is always this cry, right, where they worry about power creep. Let's pretend that the players are right, that there is power creep, right?
Yeah.
Why? What do you think drives that from a design standpoint? Why is that? If it does happen, how does it happen? How do designers allow that to happen?
For me, I will actively admit that the first iteration of something is not the best. And so if I were to put out the first version of, say, Lord Cooper, he could have been underpowered or overpowered. He definitely wasn't balanced. And the number of times you can iterate it on them and the amount of time you have to do this will definitely make a big difference in what's going on. But it's also how different you want to try to make the model. If you're going completely off the wall, you do have to make sure to rein it in some places.
Yeah.
And if your mind is not always currently on, if I am increasing this level, I have to decrease this one somewhere. If that's not constantly on your mind with every change, something could go wrong. And even the crazier models that we're making here, the crazier it is, generally the more obvious what you can do to kind of stop that impact.
Yep.
Because if something goes off and completely changes the game, that can feel really, really cool for a player. But we want to make sure that after the game, their opponent says, I know what I could have done. I can point to the exact moment that I might have made the wrong decision here, or I could have done this differently,
Yep.
and I would have changed what could have happened. And so it's really making sure that as a designer, you pay attention to where those levers are and that it's clear enough in that players will pick up on it. But you also want to make it so that models can be powerful so that better players will win. That is an important part of how we're balancing things. It shouldn't entirely be random. Random is good, but it's not the end-all be-all. It should be there to make sure that the person who's better isn't constantly winning, that they are having to challenge themselves at least somewhat. And so it's kind of managing all these levers that is where a designer and us can slip up, and that's where those things will go across. It's also, the more complicated a model is, the more likely it is that we didn't see an interaction.
Right.
That's one of the reasons why mercenaries, as they did in second edition, don't exist in third edition.
Had to go. Yep.
It makes it we have 500 models without the Explorer Society, and balancing one model with an interaction with every other model really limits what it can do. There are models in the Explorer Society that cannot exist in another faction. They would break something fundamentally.
Right.
Which does allow for crazy game modes. Our Double Rush game mode is silly and fun, and it's meant to be ridiculous. It allows you to be like, I found this insane combo.
Right.
And those modes are meant to play so quickly that like that insane combo goes off and everyone's like, ha ha ha, okay, let's do something completely else. And so as a designer, making sure that like our faction interactions are kosher, but sometimes it's okay to have weird interactions. Even stuff that doesn't matter at all. I think Zoraida and Jackdaw have this weird interaction where they both put curses on people, and they're both technically curse upgrades. And it never matters unless you're playing somehow with both masters on the same team, which doesn't exist in the normal game. But it's this silly interaction that they are both cursing people.
Right.
That has nothing to do with power creep, but it lets you flex slightly creatively. But yeah, it's just all these levers that you have to make sure that you're paying attention to. So.
That's cool. So Kyle, can we kind of talk about tomorrow a little bit?
Tomorrow, what's tomorrow?
Tomorrow's Friday, so
we have a tomorrow thing?
Yeah. So what do we have lined up for tomorrow?
So I believe we have a game lined up. So we're going to be seeing Von Schill in the Free Corps, and them trying to fight off Lord Justin Cooper and Apex and a certain dinosaur. We'll just, we'll just we'll just get that out there.
Yeah, it's exciting. So we've got two good local players. Both of the players have been on the show before, and they. The Outcast player chose their faction. They chose Von Schill, not knowing what we've learned today about how tied and similar and how the thought process of Von Schill and Cooper were, which was really interesting that ends up being the master he chose. My Lord Cooper player, it's part of the reason I asked him to do it, has I think now 15 plus games in the last 2 weeks with Lord Cooper already. So it's kind of be a really interesting thing to see not someone playing Lord Cooper for the first time, but somebody who has gotten their reps in with Lord Cooper. But he's never played against Von Schill. So I think that it's just going to make for a really interesting match tomorrow, and that's 4:00 Eastern. And that's going to be here on this YouTube channel. So make sure that you've liked and subscribed and put the bell on for this channel. I want to give a quick shout out, and I want to find out if either of you gentlemen have one. I want to give a quick shout out, and this actually came from the chat that reminded me. Great Frito gave a shout out to Weird customer service, and he or she talked about how they had some weird things happen with some purchases, and it was solved quickly and more than fairly. We're coming on 6 years I've been your customer. I've had 2 instances where I've had to reach out to customer service, and I agree with that shout out. It's something that has become, I think, part of the reputation for Weird. How about either of you gentlemen? Either of you guys have any last comments in our last minute here, or any last shout outs?
Yeah. I want to give a huge thank you to our entire community, and specifically the playtesters that really came together for the Explorer Society to make sure everything was right. Earlier in the live stream, Craig mentioned how hard it is to deal with changes every week, and occasionally that's what our playtesters have to go through. And it is enough that it is our sincerest thanks to make sure that Explorer Society is as fun and interesting as possible, and our community as a whole. It's the reason why we're here, and we're so excited to have you, and we're excited to see the Explorer Society in all of your hands.
How about you, Kyle?
Well, he took my answer, so. Let's isolate it a little bit. Everyone who's here right now. This is a brand new thing for us. It's a new thing for many of us. I know a lot of us would, we want to be at the traditional Gen Con. We want to be playing games and But I appreciate everyone who's here right now and experiencing this, and our echo issues and volume mutings and everything along those lines. So thanks for coming by.
Yeah.
We can't thank you enough, really.
Well, and we can't thank you guys enough. That's a lot of hard work that got us to this point, and it's very appreciated. And for those of you that joined us here live, we do appreciate it. For those of you that are watching this later, maybe you were in bed when we were live or at work or something like that, we do appreciate it. So for those of you that stuck around to the end, thanks so much.
Thank you, Craig.
Hey,
have a good one.
Watching?
Real convincing, Kyle.